Hey, everybody. Thanks for joining me again for another episode of the Alex Hayes podcast. Today, I have a special guest with me. He is retired Lieutenant Colonel Rob Schaefer. He is a former Green Beret of many years' experience. He is also one of the co-founders of Horse Soldier Bourbon, who grew it from nothing and scaled it and sold it to private equity. He is also now the founder of the Green Beret Way, teaching others how to lead teams well. And he is also a personal friend and close mentor of mine. And I am grateful that he is here to share his knowledge on leadership and why it is so important in business, especially when it comes to the exiting process in the conversation of how you go from starter, owner, operator, and moving into leader. So, with that, Rob, thanks so much for being here today.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, my pleasure. So, with that, let me open with a question because we posted something recently that got a lot of traction or a lot of attention, which was the same owner that built a business, that built the business from the nothing, is now the bottleneck or is now the person that is standing in the way of growth. What can you share of leadership, personal leadership transition of becoming the leader that starts something and then has to transition to somebody that teaches others how to do the thing and start to let go?
I mean, all businesses go through phases. So, the startup phase is the one that is generally mythologized. It's the one that everybody, likes to talk about how we brought ourselves up from the bootstraps. And that's all great. And that can often lead to a nice lifestyle business. But the problem comes when you want to start to scale. People are always saying, if only I could clone myself 3 or 4 times, then everything would be great. And most businesses go through like 3 phases. So you have the startup phase, and you have a growth phase, and then you have kind of a mature growth phase. And then for people who want to, at some point or another, also exit out, there's that phase as well too. But for beginning businesses, you have an idea, you have a group of people that are dedicated, motivated, often not making what it is that they would be making someplace else, and they're willing to sacrifice that for equity. And then you get something great going, and then it's time to expand, and then things kind of grind to a halt simply because now it's time to bring in people that are actually experts in what it is that they do. The founder is the one who comes up with the idea, and they are often they should be the one that has vision to take the company to the next level. But that doesn't necessarily mean that they are the right one to do it. It's important to remember, right? Steve Jobs got fired because he was notoriously not a great leader. He's a great visionary. He was a great CEO because he did those things right. But at some point or another, he needed to get out of the day-to-day business because he didn't know how to scale and how to lead and get people to want to follow him, except for the part that they felt like they were part of something that was really big and it was going to be great. So they were willing to, kind of put up with the parts of his personality that were a bit more acerbic or didn't have a whole lot of leadership stuff. So when it comes time to scale, then it's all about systems and being able to find a way to clone yourself without actually cloning yourself. And then one of the best ways to do that, obviously, then is to get a shared language for everybody in the business and have everybody trained up in terms of the same leadership style or just something that binds everybody together so that there's a shared understanding of the language and the culture, so that as they begin to grow, those people now have something that they can use to train other people as they come on, right? So even you have to think of even leadership as being a system, right? You have a leadership operating system within each business, and it's really key to be able to move to the next step, whether you're going from startup to growth or from growth to mature, because there are different things required kind of at every level.
That's fascinating. How does this translate from your time as a Green Beret? And what were some of those key lessons that you learned? I know you have a book coming out that talks about this at length, but what were some of those key lessons that you can share to the audience that can speak to this leadership transition.
Well, yeah. So this is the book that's coming out, The Green Beret Way. It's part one. It'll be out April 7th. And there are some things that I mentioned in here, but part two, which will be coming out probably later this year, which is a continuation. I talk about it more. But probably the biggest thing that we did well in the military, and especially in special operations, is that you didn't move to a higher position until you got training on. So there's this idea that I call it the paradox of the new leader. Most people get put into leadership positions because they're good at something, but once they get put into that position, the thing that they're good at, they're not supposed to be doing it anymore. Right? They're supposed to be training other people to do it, and then they're supposed to be leading and managing them. And with founders, it's kind of the same way. Once they get to a certain level, they're not supposed to be doing that thing anymore. They're supposed to be then leading the organization. And leading an organization is a different skill set from coding or what just pick whatever kind of business that it is that you're in. But generally you get into it because you like to do the stuff, right? You like doing that thing and you feel like people want it. And so you can build a business off of it. But at some point or another, then you get to a level where it's actually not your job to do the thing anymore. And in the military, when you were going to get promoted or you were going to be in a position where you would have greater responsibilities and greater authority, you went to another leadership school. And during that leadership school, they taught you different things than you were taught in the leadership school before. So when you start off as, a sergeant, they're teaching you how to move troops around. When you are a lieutenant, they're teaching you how to work with groups that are anywhere between 12 and 40 people. And when you are a lieutenant colonel, then they're telling you how to lead organizations that are hundreds of people. And there are different things that you're doing at each level. And the higher you go, the more actual managing you're going to do. Lower levels, it's going to be pretty much all leadership things. But as you go higher, then you're also going to be managing systems that people run. So you're still going to be leading them. So every level you go up, you're getting training on how to do it. And that's not something that we see in the civilian space really at all. So we don't see a whole lot of leadership training at all. That's how I got into the business. I didn't get into this business originally because I just assumed that people in the civilian world kind of had something that was similar to what we had. So when I first got out and was asked to do a leadership seminar for one of my friends, I planned for all of this high level stuff that I thought they would need and thinking about governance and high level stuff. And I came in, I start talking about this and everybody's face just went blank. And then I stopped at some point. I said, who here has ever had any leadership training at all? And this is a group of 100 people. The only person who raised their hand was the CEO. And he had only had it 20 years previously when he was getting his MBA. But other than that, he didn't have any actual practical leadership training. And it's important to remember that for MBAs, really the only practical leadership training you get is when they give you some sort of ethical leadership course, which is problematic. It can be kind of useful, but we can talk about ethics later because you have a company ethic and you have personal ethics and you have everything else, right? So it's not so important what the ethic is because a company ethic can be terrible. Right. So, and it can be very different from your personal ethic. So, but at least they're talking about the idea of consistency in those types of classes. But really, other than that, the only thing that you get, the only practical leadership training you get is when you are in charge of your small group and you're doing your case study and your leadership task is to make sure everybody gets their stuff done on time. That's it. So that's really the big problem that we have is that there's just not enough leadership training. And there's people they think, okay, I go to college to learn how to do this thing. Okay, well, you just spent a couple of years doing that, or you go to a trade school or whatever. Nobody seems to have a problem with that. But then all of a sudden you get put into a brand new job that requires different types of skills. That's a leadership job. Then we don't see people then turning around and going to a leadership school. It's crazy if you think about it that way, right?
Absolutely. No, absolutely. I think that's some really solid observations here is that we definitely tend to hear the stories over and over again. You hire your best tech and you promoted your best tech and now you've lost your best tech and
You still don't
We're
have a
gonna
leader,
you
right? You
still
still
don't
don't
have
have
a
a
leader.
manager.
Yeah, I
Right.
still don't have a manager, right? Everybody's heard that before. And I'm sure at some point most people have experienced that before. Because I think this is super, super necessary for people to hear because it's sometimes there's there's ways and there's training and there's things that they're just not they don't know exists, right? That can help them with transitioning from one mindset or one skill of trade craft to leadership.
Yeah.
And I think this is super important.
It's not just the skills, it's a different mindset. So you got a different skill set, you got a different tool set, you got a different mindset. And you have to change all of those things when you go from being a doer to being a manager. And when you go from being the person who is in charge of a startup to now being the person who is going to oversee the growth of your organization in a growth phase.
Absolutely. So what would you say from a leadership skills perspective? The company founder is now still owner operator. What would be your single best piece of wisdom for that owner operator that is struggling, trying to figure out where do I start this transition? How do I start to become a leader of others? And how do I train people? Because I hear a lot too of people are afraid that, well, if I invest too much into a single person, they're just going to take my stuff and leave. Right. And they're going to go start their own thing. Or there's, how do you talk to owners like that are afraid of investing in other people and don't even know where to start training up other leaders?
Well, the first thing I recommend is for them to take some leadership courses and get some skills themselves, because until they do it themselves, they don't really know what it is that they need to do, and they don't know what to teach other people how to do. Really, what they're going to do at this point is they're going to expand their culture. When you take a look at all the things that leaders do, okay, and then all the things that encompass company culture, right? They're all connected. And I call this ethosynthesis, right? You have this company ethos, and it comes from leadership. Every single I can map out every single thing that is associated with company culture, and we can draw a line back to that as to being leadership. Even if it's something as simple as we wear Hawaiian shirts on Friday, okay? Even if the company founder didn't come up with that, if somehow or another organically within the organization we're now wearing Hawaiian shirts on Friday because that's our company culture, at some point or another, that leader still had to make the decision that this is okay and I'm going to do that. That's still a leadership decision. So the first thing that they have to do is they have to understand that how leadership fits into that company culture, because as you grow and as you expand, that's really what you're doing is you have to grow that company culture, and you have to get it ingrained as a system so that as new people come in, they become part of that culture. They understand how everybody operates together, how we communicate with each other, how we do evaluations, how we handle problems. These are all leadership things, but as you can see, they're also company culture things. It's all completely connected. So you can't really understand that as a CEO until you get some of this training yourself. And then you can start to see how the CEO's decisions or the founder's decisions are going to affect more than just talking to, the guys at the next couple of tables over when they're first starting off. You see what I'm saying? Leadership, you literally have to have a leadership operating system. And everybody has one. A lot of them aren't good because they haven't been formed by anything. It's just how they do stuff. And how they do stuff now is probably not based on best practices.
Tell us more. Unpack this leadership operating system just a little bit more if you can for people that again have probably never heard of any of the stuff that you've talked about, which is like ethos and having an ethos-centric culture and leadership operating system. Unpack a little bit more of this for the audience.
So part of it is understanding your place in it, but part of it is also understanding how other people work, because the culture is important. And when I say that it might not be based on best practices, the truth of the matter is that 99%, if not more, of bad leadership decisions or bad leadership traits are actually based in fear. So I can take every single bad leadership trait, like micromanaging, and I can trace it back to one of the fight, flight, or freeze responses. And depending on what kind of person you are, it could be all three. Every single one, you can bring it back. And so if you haven't even understood kind of like there's this fear that operates in the background, it's like the Matrix, right? Once you understand it, you can see it and then you can never unsee it. But in the meantime, it's constantly operating in the background. And so that fear informs you how to lead and do your things right now and informs the culture. For instance, if you're concerned, if you think that people are not going to do their jobs unless they are in the office from 9 to 5 and you can watch them every day, then that's going to influence how you lead. Because really what you think is that people are lazy and that if you're not there to watch them, they're not going to do what it is that they need to be doing. They need to be watched all the time, right? That's a fear. And so that can come out as micromanaging, that can come out as not wanting to be flexible at all in terms of work hours or kind of benefits that get out there. But you can flip the whole thing on its head if you kind of look at that fear yourself and ask yourself why it's there and deal with that fear itself. Because the example I like to use is all those teenage kids that play games all day long and their parents get angry with them and talk about how lazy they are. But how long do they play that game? If you don't grab them for a meal, they'll play for 8, 12, 15 hours. That's not laziness. That's somebody who's really committed to doing something. The problem is that they're not doing what it is that you want them to do, right? And nowadays, gaming is actually a profession. There are people that get paid millions of dollars to be professional gamers. And if they were lucky enough to get one of those, then everybody would talk about how great it was that they practiced for so long and what a hard worker they were when they were busy playing video games all day long instead of doing their homework. Once you realize that you can lead with a stick, right, where you're hitting people, you can lead with carrots. When you come to the realization that most people are not lazy, it's just you haven't figured out the right way to motivate them, then your whole world opens up. But the biggest thing that happens is that the emphasis comes off of them to always do what it is that you want them to do, regardless of circumstances, onto you to find a way to figure out what you want for the organization also aligns with what they want. Because once you align that, guess what? You don't have to motivate anymore. They're going to come into work. They're going to work hard. And it's not always about money. There's plenty of people out there who want to learn new skills. They want more responsibility. They want to do things. And giving them the opportunity to learn new things or to take on new tasks often is a much higher motivator than just giving them more money. So that whole mindset right there, that's one part of your leadership operating system where you say, I think people are lazy. And then you realize that, okay, that line in that code is wrong, or it's not as effective as something else. It's not a best practice. So if you replace that one single line in your code, it changes the way that you work with everybody else. And that changes then your entire company culture, if that makes sense. Is it more difficult than just simply looking at somebody and say, do it because I said so? Yes. But when you were a kid, how well did that work for you? Right.
Yeah. No, I think that's super powerful. And this leads to another question because a good follow up question to this is I've had conversations with owners that have this belief that they can't find anybody to take over their business. Nobody wants my business. Nobody's going to do my business like I can do it. That this generation's lazy. They don't know how to work. Nobody wants to work anymore. Like you're saying, they're lazy. How would you approach somebody like that and try to get them to see things differently? Right? What would be your take on somebody that speaks like that? And then how would you suggest that they move forward so that they're not backing themselves into a no-win situation where they can't get out?
Well, I mean, let's face it, nobody's going to care about your business as much as you do. So to some extent, the idea that, nobody's going to work as hard as I will can be true. However, depending on what stage of the company is, right, there's plenty of ways to get people to act like an owner by making them an owner. Right? So it doesn't even always have to be equity, but telling you, just even the slightest bit, like 0.5% makes somebody feel like all of a sudden now that they have a much greater vested interest in making it successful, because there's a lot of pride that comes with that. But you don't even have to give away. I mean, you can do things like profit sharing, or getting things where people where you align what it is that they want with what you want. That takes longer, but in the long term, it's actually a lot shorter, because you only have to have that conversation once, as opposed to, say, you've got somebody who never seems to want to do anything. How many times are you going to have that conversation with them? You might even let them go at some point. Whereas if you really figure out what it is that they want, and then you align that with your own goals, you can have a conversation once, you can make some decisions, and then you can get out of their way, because they're going to want to do it because they want to do it. So nobody's ever going to care about your business as much as you do. The millennials, or the Gen Zs, want different things. And whereas our parents might have been looking to have longevity with a company where they were going to get a nice pension after 30 years, a lot of your Gen Z folks aren't really interested in that. But you can find out what they are interested in. In general, we know that they are interested more in like quality of life issues. They're more interested in kind of experiences than having things. And so by sitting down with people and really getting to know them and understanding what it is that they want, it is possible to motivate anybody. I mean, it's very rare when you run into somebody that won't work hard for something that they want. An example, um, you're not going to use her real name, so we'll call her Cindy. So, Cindy was like in one of the companies I work with, the least liked person in the accounting department, and one of the least liked people in the company, simply because everybody thought she was lazy and she did not do as much work as everybody else did. And everybody felt like they had to pick up on the slack for her. And it became this self perpetuating thing, because she never got any more work because nobody expected that she was going to do the work. And so she literally was doing less because people didn't think that she could do more. And that just made things worse. But when you talk to her after a while, there's one thing in the world that she really wanted to do. Her daughter played sports, because she played on soccer team, and she never was able to watch her daughter play in any of these games because they were always like on Wednesday at 4 p.m. And when you understand that, then it's very easy to come back and say, okay, well, guess what? You want to go see your daughter's games. This is what we're going to do. You you need to have all these things done by this amount of time, and because we're going to give you some extra time off, you got to do this extra stuff too. And if you do all that stuff, then you can take off early on Wednesdays, go watch your daughter's games. And guess what? Right? All of a sudden, this person is doing not just their normal amount of the work to standard, right? Because you got to make sure that you follow through and check for the standards. But then she's doing extra work as well, too, because that's what motivates her. And all of our Gen Z folks are the same way, but they're motivated by different things. So it might be hard to sell off a company to somebody in Gen Z, simply because they're not thinking in terms of maybe the original plan that the founder had. That doesn't mean that they won't be interested in that company at some point or another. It doesn't mean that somebody who's worked in that company doesn't want to step up. But it really comes down to understanding what everybody wants, and then finding a way to align that with your goals and the company goals.
Very powerful. Finding what people really want and then aligning incentives to make sure that everybody's working in the same direction with a shared vision.
Yeah.
I think that's super powerful.
Now you did some of this on your own. If I remember when you were working for that company as kind of that C-suite person who was in charge of like all the building stuff. You were like
Yeah.
the general contractor for all these things that were going on, right? And if I remember, you had some issues with some folks, and those went away very quickly when you realigned what it was that they wanted with what the incentives were, and then your problems went away, right?
Yeah. No, when you have honest conversations, you have the ability to get to what really matters. And that was that's hard for a lot of people, is to have honest conversations and share for one reason or another. Because sometimes I think that we feel like we are so far in our own heads that we don't think that somebody else can understand, or we're trying to impose our own will. But taking a second to listen, and I know one of the things I learned from you was this active listening skill, which works amazingly, and with the empathetic communication, as you call it. It's listening with the intent of to understand, and I think that's super powerful for people. And that I used it in that situation. I've used it many, many times since, even especially with my own kids as they're getting older and we're having deeper conversations. Let me ask you another question that's on the other side of things, though. So some people say I can't find anybody, and then there's some. Particularly, I see this with family businesses, right? So family business owners who say, "Well, you know what? I'm just going to give it to my adult children, and they're just going to figure it out. Whatever happened, I figured it out. They're going to have to figure it out, right? They're going to learn exactly how I learn, which is to throw them in the deep end." What do you say to those people?
I'd say you might want to talk to your kids first and find out how much they want to do. I mean, it would be nice if you could leave stuff to your kids, but they're their own people. Like, for instance, like my daughter is really, really, really good at business analytical stuff. Really. And I wanted her to come help me with the Green Beret Way business for a while, and she always backs off because she wants to do things her own way, and she doesn't want to feel like she's kind of glomming on to whatever it is that I started. So, that's disappointing. You want your kids to come in and maybe feel as passionate about something as you do, but it's not always the case. I mean, if you are lucky enough to inherit a business that's doing pretty well, and it's the kind of thing that you like, then that's great. But this is really a good point for all of your CEOs that are also trying to go from startup to a growth phase. You're not going to necessarily like every part of that business, even if you inherit it. So what's important is you have to find the parts that you like to do and that you're good at. And then you have to get other people to do the other things because you're going to probably suck at those other things. You can do it if you have to. When you're a founder, you do everything. You do all the stuff that you need to do, even the stuff that you don't like to do. But if you were to give this to your kids and they don't like doing the accounting stuff, then you don't want to have them working on the accounting stuff. You got to find the thing that they really love so that they can fall in love with this business the way that you did. And it's not necessarily going to be for the same reasons that you did. Again, you got to figure that out. But that puts the onus of leadership on you and takes it away from them, right? If I just give my kids my business, then I'm leaving it up to them to figure it out. Whereas what I really need to do is maybe sit and talk to them and find out, you worked here in the summer for a bunch of times. What did you like about that? Do you like this business? I would like to be able to give it to you, but let's figure out, what parts you really like about doing this and then what parts we need to give to somebody else. Hiring professional help is critical for both a growth stage or handing off a business to somebody else. I mean, I like to say with Horse Soldier, I've been fired, at least 4 or 5 times now, but I keep getting fired upwards because, and this is germane to the conversation that we're having and to your folks as well too, because when I first started, I was the CFO. Do I know how to be a CFO? No. Did I know how to write a business plan? Nope. Did I know how to do a financial model for or a bearer model for distilleries? Nope. You just figure all that stuff out and then you do it. But once you get to the point where you're professional enough, then we realize, okay, we probably shouldn't have Rob be the CFO because he doesn't know what the hell he's doing. And so we bring in a real CFO. So just that one part of the job, which was, that wasn't even the HR part. That wasn't even the managing everything else that you do. Just that one little part. Now we have a CFO and a controller and 2 CPAs just to handle all the stuff that I used to because now we have professional people that came in. So I got fired from that job, right? And then I'm doing like all of the national kind of marketing stuff in terms of sending people out to do events and things like that. But then when Gallo came in and became a significant minority partner, right, they've got a machine to do that. And they've got people, and that's part of the reason we brought them on as a big investor, still a minority investor. So we still own the company, but they are, besides us, they are the next biggest investor. and they have systems that came with them. And that's how we've been able to continue to grow because, again, I talked earlier, it's all about systems when it comes time to grow. And Gallo has lots and lots of systems that are considered to be best in breed. So I don't have to do that. I got fired from that job, right? So the whole point is that you want to get fired as many times as you need to and get fired upwards so that you can focus on the things that you're really good at, as opposed to trying to focus a lot of time on things that you don't like, you're not great at, you had to do. And if you want to have somebody in the family follow up with that, you got to figure out that part for them as well too. Don't try and have them do all the stuff that you like to do if they hate that, because then they're going to fail.
Again, that's such powerful wisdom there, and I love it that you describe it as getting fired upwards. I think that's it. It's funny to say it that way, but it's true. You know, like you get to continuously fire yourself from positions that you're not good at, and I think that in and of itself is a skill, is learning to let go of different things that you've been doing. So let's talk to now a little bit about the owner that's been doing the same routine, right, for probably multiple decades. So he's got 20, 30, 40, maybe approaching 50 years doing the exact same thing, running his business. It's very comfortable, couple million of revenue, and he just doesn't know who to be without the business because he's just been doing that same routine for so long. What would you say to him or her of how to start to let go of this identity of the business is them?
Yeah, that's going to be tough because when you don't generally become a founder just because you want to make money. I mean, you have some folks that are serial entrepreneurs who know how to start businesses and build them up and then sell them off. Um, but actually that's its own kind of skill set. But I don't think that's who we're talking about here. What we're talking about it sounds like, or you got into this business because there's something about it that you loved. So maybe you worked for somebody else and you realized you could do it better, or you saw an opportunity in the market and then jumped on it. And it's your baby. So you're not gonna want to give up part of your identity because that's who you are. But that doesn't mean that it can't morph. It can't evolve. So the first thing that you do is start with baby steps. Find the thing that you do that you like the least, and then let's get somebody trained on how to do that, whether it's somebody internally or if you have to bring in somebody else to handle that part of the job. Because I guarantee you that there's not a founder everywhere that likes doing all of the parts of their job. So start off with the stuff that you like the least. Train somebody how to do that and then give that to them. And so that you will feel comfortable about it, make sure that you build into your system way that they're going to be able to communicate how well they're doing and if they're meeting their metrics in such a way so that then you're not going to worry about it. Because if you don't do that, then you're going to hand this thing off and then you're going to be constantly worried. Then you're going to be looking over their shoulder and nobody's going to be happy. But if you build this thing in such a way, it's like, okay, well, every Friday, this person's going to talk to me for 15 minutes. They're going to show me this dashboard. They're going to show me these things that I want to see to make sure that we're on track. And there'll be a couple of minutes for them to ask me questions. Okay, well, then you're going to feel much more comfortable about handing this thing off because you're going to talk about it every Friday. You're going to be able to, in case you start to see a trend that maybe they didn't see, you're going to catch it right now. You're going to be able to deal with it. You're going to be able to train them a little bit more, but you're not going to worry about it. So you start finding those things until, eventually at some point or another, you're left with the one or two things that you do like to do. And then you get to really kind of be CEO at that point. Or if it's not vision stuff, maybe what you're really best at is kind of the COO stuff, the operation stuff. Maybe your business hasn't grown because you're really not kind of like that big visionary person. You're really good at making this machine work really effectively, right? Well, then as the owner, you can still get somebody else who is good at that thing and you can There's plenty of owners who are now the COO and not the CEO. They still have You're still the owner. You still have, you know, veto authority. And even if you don't have a board, but the point is that you just find those things, start peeling them off, and make sure that you have ways where the reporting and the metrics are very strong so that you don't have to worry about it. And then you begin to have more time to do things because now you're having people come to you and report to you on these things. And all of a sudden you got a bunch more time. So now you can maybe start to do that thing that you told yourself you were going to do 30 years ago. Right? You start this business and you say, I'm going to work really hard for this so that someday I can do X. And then you hardly ever do X. Why? Because you're so busy in the business doing stuff that you feel like you can't do it. But then if you kind of do what it is that I've just outlined here, then all of a sudden you have enough time that you can start to do X. And more importantly, you can probably do something you've never done before, which is to go take a 2-week vacation, which I consider to be the gold standard for, a business owner or a CEO. If you could take a 2-week vacation and everything runs just fine without you, then you have been successful because you've trained everybody well enough to make sure that they can handle all the issues. I understand, right? So if a major fire happens or something like that, yes, you're going to get a call. But for you to be able to go on vacation and just totally relax, that means you've done your job because that's really what you're supposed to do. And that's how you kind of give up control and start thinking about those things that you said that you were going to do someday and then start to do those things because now you're making time for yourself.
I love that. So it's gradually peeling away from your task list and delegating the outcome and the responsibility to people beneath you. So you're making sure that they have what they need. But this leads to another interesting question of how do you approach systems with leadership? Because this speaks to kind of maybe this is like a two pronged question because how do you look at leadership versus management, right? Are they the same thing or are they different things? And I want to hear your opinion on that. And then how do you use systems that support leadership?
Okay, remind me of that second question when we get to it, but the leadership and management are not the same thing. So we manage systems, we manage fleets, we manage processes, but we lead people. There are very few people out there who can say that, there are very few actual real, what I would call managers out there. Unless your job is to simply manage an entire fleet of vehicles and maintenance and things like that, then there's probably people involved. If there's people involved, then you need to think of yourself, first of all, as a leader. So we manage systems, we lead people. And if we lead the people well enough, those systems that they might be in charge of, they'll do a good job at managing those systems. That makes sense. So leadership and management are different things. The higher you go in the C-suite or the bigger that you make your company, you will start to do more management activities because now, I mean, what does HR do? HR essentially is managing kind of where people are going. They're managing the careers of people. They're managing their training. See what I'm saying? When you become a COO, right, you still have a bunch of people that you're leading, but you're managing different divisions of the company, if that makes sense. So you take on more management, but you're always leading people. Even as you're doing more management tasks, you're always leading people. If if there's one person that you're in charge of, then you need to think of yourself as a leader first and as a manager second, because people are more important than your systems. Because you take care of the people, the systems will take care of themselves. So, and then what was that second question you asked?
So the second question is how do you use systems to
Mm.
support leadership? How do they like how does that relationship between leadership and systems development work together?
So the easiest is your evaluations. So most startups don't have any kind of formal evaluation system because that stuff takes time and you need somebody to manage that. However, we have this idea that somebody can only lead 3 to 5 people effectively. And that is true generally. However, if you're a good leader and you could spend your entire time simply doing the process of leading these people, you could lead 20 people to do things, but you're not going to do anything else except lead those people. That makes sense. And a way that you do that is, what is your evaluation system? And having an evaluation system that focuses on metrics, and you can call them KPIs or whatever you want to give it, right? The end state. But when you have a system that has very, very clear metrics, and you have a way to ensure that we're going to talk about those things and that the people have enough resources to do those things, then you let them go and do stuff, right? Then you don't actually have to do much except take their reports. Right? You could do that for a lot of people. So having an evaluation system where you sit down with somebody at the beginning of the quarter, you pick out the 4 most important things that they need to work on, that you want them to do. You make sure that they're also in agreement with what those standards are. What does success actually look like? Because that way, at the end of the at the end of the period, there's actually no arguing. If you have a very, very clear standard that says that, you know, you need to do this many sales. Sales are easy because you can always put a number to them. But people like in HR, they say, oh, it's fuzzy. You can't do that. You can always find a metric. You got to work hard sometimes, but you can always find a metric. You find that hard metric so that at the end of that quarter, the end of the year, whatever, like somebody from outside your organization could come in and they could sit down and look at what that person did, use that metric, and decide whether or not they were successful or not. Then you don't have this arguing back and forth like, well, no, I did this, but what I really meant was this. Very, 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 very clear standards. And then making sure that that person understands, how that fits in terms of your priorities. And then again, it falls on you, right? How often are we going to talk about this? We had talked about this weekly. Is this a daily report? Is this once a month, right? And then you give them everything they need to include the guidance on where their left and right limits are. Oftentimes it's like, okay, if it costs less than $5,000, okay, then you can make the decision. If it's over 5,000, then you bring it to me, kind of thing. If it affects these people, then it comes to me. Other than that, you make the decision. So you give them very, very clear lanes. And when you spend the time crafting something like that as it's part of a system, then all of a sudden leadership becomes super easy because people are now leading themselves. That's what you want to get to, right? I call it endogenous leadership. People lead themselves when you've set up a system like this where it allows them to be successful and that they also have a say in it. What I call them is cooperative performance agreements, or CPAs. And you let them be involved in this. And normally if say there's going to be 4 things that we're going to talk about for the quarter or for the year, however you want to break it up, I normally ask them, like, what's something you've been wanting to work on for a while and you haven't had time to, because I'm going to now this is going to be part of the thing that you're going to do, because they'll get excited about that. Now, it might not get as high a priority in the way that I do that. If let's say I've got 4 priorities for the quarter or the year, whatever it is, right? I'll put down, okay, this for me is 30%. This is 20%. This is 10. So it might be a 10% for me, but for them, it's going to be important. But it still becomes part of their evaluation. And that way they're going to want to get it done because it's something they've been wanting to do for a long time anyways. Maybe it's somebody wants to rewrite this particular SOP because it's a constant pain in the butt. That's a great kind of not urgent, but important thing that we're going to let them do that. And that's going to be part of their evaluation. But see, we've built a system now where people are going to lead themselves. And we're not going to have any kind of arguments when it comes to evaluation time because the metrics are so clear that they know ahead of time if they've met it or not. We know what our evaluation is going to be like before we have the meeting. But the system then includes that, okay, if we're going to look at these things quarterly, we're going to sit down and we're going to look at it quarterly. We're going to talk about what it is. We're going to, do the next quarter now. And at the end of the year, we're going to look at all of them. And people love that because it's clarity. People who are really good at their jobs hate ambiguity. because they want to know what success means because then they can rise to meet it. But if they don't know what success means, then that's when they start slacking off because it's like, it doesn't matter anyways. I do this and it just doesn't matter. Or I do this and then they say that, that's not what they wanted. And then you just see them like they kind of put their hands up. But again, it's that whole communication piece. When you find out what it is that they want to do, then you align that and you can do that through this system in terms of what I call it like a CPA, or it can be any kind of system for those evaluations. But now what you have done is you've aligned everybody with the organization's goals or your goals. And then you can like just set them free. So that's one system that you have there. You have training systems. If what you want to do is to be able to grow your company from a startup into a mid-sized business, and we've identified the fact that none of your people really have any leadership training, well, what's the training plan? Is there a system for training? What types of training should they get, and when should people get things? What should be expected of them that they're going to be able to know when they get out of this particular training program? Because there's lots of training programs. So what is it that we need to have? And just the fact, just that exercise where you sit down and you are very intentional about a thing, whether it's the training program or whether it's going to be how people get promoted within the company. Just that exercise itself helps you out because it gives you clarity. It gives you like a plan. You can even put that down on paper at this point and say, for promotions, I think somebody should probably be in their job for 3 years and show proficiency in their basic job. And then they should take a leadership course and they should, maybe there's a test involved or whatever. And then they need to spend a couple of months working, with another leader. And that's on top of their regular job. They're going to also be getting some leadership training. That in and of itself, just that little bit right there, you've now put in a system. And if you then publish that to everybody, then everybody knows what it is that they got to do. So the people who then want to become leaders, who want to get into the system, they've got a very clear path that they have to follow. And people rise to that. People want to like what they do. They want to go into work and enjoy what they're doing. They want to be motivated because our work is it's at least a third of our life, and you want to be able to enjoy that and get motivated to do that. So when you find ways to do that and you make things very, very clear and you put these systems in place and you make it very clear to people, then things that's how you scale. That's how you get things to take off. Just doing those kind of simple systems like that.
So as the leader you are building the box, right? You're building the system or building the operating
You're building the
cage.
scaffolding, right? You're building the scaffolding so that everybody else can then build around you, but you're in charge of the foundation. You're in charge of the scaffolding.
I love that. I love that picture. I love that imagery. Now, I want to ask you kind of maybe an antithesis question, which is when somebody is abdicating leadership in their own company, what shows up when leadership is abdicated?
Well, you get asked a lot of questions and you end up generally getting very frustrated because if you feel like you're working 70 hours a week and everybody else is only working 35 hours a week and you feel like you are telling people what to do and then you're still ending up doing most of it, then that means you haven't really delegated. What you've done is you've abdicated. And it just means you just kind of threw it on them without any kind of like, hey, you're in charge of this report now. Okay, well, they don't understand what right looks like. They don't understand what the standard is. They don't understand what kind of help they have. They don't understand, what their left and right boundaries are, what resources are available to them. I mean, you've just thrown it off your plate. You've abdicated it. That's not what delegation is. When you're going to delegate things properly, or you're going to train somebody, right? It's more than just um, telling them what to do. You have to make sure that they have all the resources that they need to have. You need to talk about how often we're going to discuss this. I keep talking about the communications thing, but I mean, just saying, okay, every Friday we're going to meet at 9:30 a.m. and you're going to show me these things and you're going to talk about any problems you have. And I'm not going to bug you any more than that. I'm not going to look over your shoulder. I'm not going to micromanage you. But every Friday, we're going to talk about this. You're going to give me you give me these stats, right? I mean, they just love that because now they get a chance to go off and do things. But you got to make sure that you've talked about that communications piece. You got to talk about what their boundaries are. And you got to make sure that they've got all the resources to get all of that stuff done. And then the biggest thing that you have to do is you have to not just tell them what to do. You have to be very clear on the metrics. You have to define that end state for them. You have to tell them what right looks like. In the military, we refer to this as commander's intent. And it is more important than a mission statement. Because when you tell somebody what to do and then you give them the kind of what their parameters are, you give them some leeway, but they still think they need to do something a certain way. Whereas that might not actually be what's important to you. What's important is that at the end of the day or at the end of the quarter, you're going to say, have greater sales. That's what you want, right? You want to be making more money. You want to be more successful in this thing. So it's not, and you might define a task where it seems like that's going to be obvious to somebody, but it's not. What's a good example? It might just be like, you need to increase sales by 10%. That sounds like it's a very clear metric, but there might be different reasons to increase those sales. It might be that you want to increase sales in this particular product because you want to be able to use that as a springboard for the next product. And understanding the purpose, understanding the end state gives that person some leeway because you might actually be more successful at accomplishing that end state and not meet the stated goal. But in the end, what's more important? What's more important is that long-term thing. So that comes about if we're not clear what success looks like on our own. And if we can't communicate that. So that's the secret sauce to delegating something is making sure, first of all, you understand the reason for something. Sometimes it's simple, right? But other times it's not. It's we want to get this thing done. And I might have this other idea in the back of my mind why that's important. If I haven't communicated that, then they can't get there. So, in the military, what this does is this is really what has allowed US military to be so incredibly successful because at all levels, people are able to make decisions. If the mission statement would be, first platoon conducts an assault on Hill 782 no later than this time in order to seize terrain, right? But if the commander's intent was, and when you then give them that, like a platoon will have very specific boundaries that they're allowed to operate in. And if you say that you're going to do an assault, it means generally certain types of things. You're going to do things in a certain way. But if you say that, the intent of this operation is that, by 5 p.m., that hill is completely secure and you're able to repel any enemy counterattacks. All of a sudden your world opens up because you can still get to that success and maybe when that platoon is doing their assaults, it's not going well. And instead of doing a normal kind of assault that they would do, they change the mission. Maybe they flank out more. Maybe they do some other things. Maybe they go into somebody else's zone that normally they wouldn't do. But at the end of the day, they're getting to that objective and they're doing what it is that's important at the end. That intent, that very clear idea of what success looks like, what the end state should be, allows people freedom of maneuver to get things done. And it stops them from asking you questions all the time. When you've abdicated something, it's when you're getting questions all the time and you end up doing half of it. Whereas if you are very clear about all of those things and you give them everything they need, give them their parameters, tell them exactly what success looks like, how often we're going to communicate about it, and then you can just let them go, right? They come back to you if they have problems. If after that first week, they're talking to you about issues outside of whatever that normal communications time is, more than twice a week, then you've not done it well. I'm going to say, and by week 3, if it's a long-term project, if they're talking to you 1 time per week outside of that, unless it's like some emergency, then you haven't done your job well. You have not given them everything that they need. And that's on you because you've abdicated. You haven't delegated.
So if you kind of like sum up, because there's a lot of meat in there, I think to sum up what you're saying is if you haven't led or you're not leading your team, you end up with fielding a lot of questions, feeling like you're the one putting out all the fires, feeling like you're the one doing half the work that you're paying all these other people to be doing, and you're working twice as hard and making half as much as you should. And you're wondering why nobody else can keep up with you or why nobody else, and you think everybody else is lazy. You're thinking that everybody else is lazy and that nobody's doing their job. And it's a hard position, but that describes a lot of people's realities, a lot of business owners' realities right now. And I think it's important to reframe it of how can I lead better rather than blame other people. We tend to try to blame people, and that puts power outside of ourselves and saying it's somebody else's fault that I have to do this, rather than saying, well, maybe if there's something that I can do better as a person, maybe we can relook at how to do this better. So I appreciate that insight. And there's I want to follow up this question with the intentionality, because you've brought up commander's intent, right? Which we were talking about intent inside the business and what it should look like with employees or other people executing your vision inside the company. But what do you think about a maybe understanding their own intent of describing what their end state would be after an exit? How important is that part to be intentional, just as intentional in the business with the person and the personal life side?
Um, it's like getting in the car and driving. We know we want to get someplace. So we get in the car and we start driving in that general direction. But if we've never actually looked at exactly where we want to go on the map and where all of those, or the long drive, we're going to stop for the night somewhere. Where's the best place to do that? That's what a lot of folks do when they get into their business and they've been doing it for a while. They're busy in their business instead of working on their business, and they haven't stopped to take a look at that kind of level and actually ask themselves, like, what do I want out of this? It's easy when you're in the middle of it and you're saying, okay, well, I'm making good money. I'm paying for everybody. We're paying for all the bills, and I want to every year I want to expand. That's that's kind of where people get maybe where we say we want to expand sales by 5% this year, and that's great. But what's the 10-year plan? If you don't know the 10-year plan, it's like you're in that car and you're just kind of driving in the general direction, but you haven't planned what the end state is. You haven't planned kind of where those intermediate stops are going to be. Like you literally don't know where you're going. So you can't get there. If you don't know where you're going, you cannot get there. So you literally have to plot that out on the map. And mentally, you have to do the same thing. You have to sit down and say, okay, exactly what does this look like at 10 years? What does it look like at 20 years? What does it look like before I think about selling it, what does it need to look like? And then you work backwards from that, because if you're not achieving those things, you're not working towards those things, then you're not going to get there. If that makes sense. Too easy just to kind of fall into what we're doing every day and and using kind of nebulous terms like we want to increase sales by 10% this year, which is a success for just about any company, right? That's a great thing. But does that actually get us to where we want to be in 15 years, where we want to maybe sell the business? There might be other things we need to do than just expand it by 10%. I'm betting you there will be, because if you just increase sales every year by 10%, but you are not increasing the capacity of your team, you're not building some systems, you're not going to sell that business, or you're not going to sell it as much as you want, because people are going to want to come into your business and they're going to buy it if it is successful and there's enough systems in place that they don't have to be you. So just increasing your sales every year by 10% might sound great, but if your goal 15 years from now is to sell the business, there's other things you have to do as well too. You have to build that infrastructure. You have to have a leadership team that can go. You have to have systems in place so that somebody else could come in and literally take it over. That's that 2-week vacation rule. You need to be able to go off for at least 2 weeks, go to Italy, take cooking classes, hang out in the mountains there for a month. Then you're ready to sell your business. But until then, you shouldn't even be thinking about it. What are all those things you got to do? Literally, it's you have to look at the map. You have to figure out exactly where you want to be and then work backwards from there.
I love that. And I think it's so important that people take as much time as they need to and be just as intentional about their personal life as they do their business life. Like you're saying, we spend so much time of our life, especially as founders, right? As entrepreneurs, that 30% of your life is probably closer to 60, 70% for a long time of a good portion of your life because you eat, you sleep, you breathe the business. And if you're not as intentional about your personal life and what you want the end state to look like, or at least the next chapter, then how do you know if you've achieved success? Because success is very arbitrary. It's very much just personal definition. So it's how do you want to live and spend the precious moments that we have in this world? Because we're only here for a short while, and it's how do you want to spend them? So I think it's super important to be intentional with that time.
Yeah. So many founders will have made a business plan, but I bet you very few of them have made a life plan. And
Yep.
we ask, like, some of us like having our own businesses just because I like to tell people if I'm going to work for an asshole, I'm going to work for the one in the mirror, right? So, and that's and that's enough. But ultimately, you're doing this because you want something too,
Yep.
and that can be more control, it could be more money, but ultimately you want something out of this, and so you need to make sure that you're keeping all of those in mind as well too, because at some point or another you're going to be you're going to be working so hard on the business that you're going to not realize that you've actually gotten to the point where you can enjoy some of those things that you always wanted to get to, and now you're not taking advantage of it. So what's the point, right? You gotta have a plan.
Yep.
You got a
Gotta have
business
a
plan, you
plan.
need to have a life plan because nobody else is
I love
gonna
that.
do that for you. If you don't plan your own life, chances are you're gonna fall into somebody else's plan. And how much time are they gonna put into your plan?
Yep, absolutely. And we have so many demands on our time, and we have so many demands as an entrepreneur, so many demands as husbands, fathers. There's so many things that eat up our day that if we're not intentional about investing in our kids or investing in our wife or investing in the experiences that people will remember, the clock runs out, and it's important to remember that the time is the most valuable resource any of us ever get, and you can only spend it. You cannot save it. There's no saving of time. So
Yeah, it's
it,
the
it
only resource that we have that you can't make more of.
yep. So I think I mean this is just hitting all the right tones right now of just being intentional with your time, and that's why leadership matters. That's why leadership matters because you only have so much time on this earth. You only have so much time to accomplish different things, and making sure that you know how to lead people to accomplish a common mission, both personally for you and for the business and for your employees and for your family. No, there's no greater definition of success than accomplishing that, all the visions and moving everything in a forward progress. So you've been very gracious with your time. I'm going to wrap up just with maybe one final question. We could talk about your exit. Hopefully, you can come back on. It's another time to talk about your exit experience and how that went with private equity and that whole thing. But this conversation, I feel like, was super important to have for the audience because there's so much wisdom and so much bad information about leadership. Understanding what good leadership looks like, I feel like was really important to try to help educate our audience with. So with that, Rob, I'll leave you with the last word to the audience. If you could boil down everything that you understand about leadership into one first principle that you want our audience to remember, what would that be?
Lead, be a leader first. Lead, then manage. That's if you think of yourself as a leader before anything else, then it changes your perspective around. And if you need help figuring that out, then you can buy the Green Beret Way. where you can contact us, and we'll be happy to have you go through our firefighter to fire starter course, right? You want to stop putting out fires and start lighting a fire under other people. But really, if you do nothing else but mentally consider yourself to be a leader first, and then think about all of the responsibilities that that entails, then you'll be more successful.
Love that. Lead, then manage. Lead, then manage. That's great first principle. So, yeah, Rob, with that, tell everybody where they can find your book. Tell everybody about your fire starter. I'll give you a few more minutes here because I want you to talk about all the things that you have going on, because it's super exciting to hear about all the material that you are building in the leadership space.
So you can go to thegreenberetway.com, and that is going to talk about kind of the whole leadership operating system that we have. So the first book, The Green Beret Way, book 1, will be out April 7th. That will be shortly followed by the workbook. It'll be the kind of workbook that you can get an ebook and you can fill things out electronically in it as well too. Book 2 will come out later this year. Get information there again at thegreenberetway.com. Then we have our own epic leadership assessment so that you can, and this is based on all the stuff that I've done here. I want to make it very clear. Like I haven't invented, well, I've invented some of it, but really what I have done is I've taken principles that are used within the special operations field and especially Army Special Forces and modified them for use in business. And why that is particularly helpful these days, I think, is that what we do as Green Berets is very different from what anybody else does in the military or even within special operations. Because I mean, like, how hard is it to lead a bunch of fighter pilots or literally Navy SEALs or even Green Berets, right? You've already self-selected so many times and you've gone through so many things that you're pretty easy to lead. But what Green Berets have to do as part of our two main missions is we have to go behind the lines and work with people that don't like you. Maybe you've actually tried to kill you before, speak a completely different language, like Gen X and Gen Z, come from a completely different culture. They think very differently than you, like Gen X and Gen Z, and they don't directly work for you. And a lot of our Gen Z folks, right? They feel very fluid. Like if they don't feel like they've got a job that they really enjoy, they're going to go someplace else. Like you can't tell them to do what it is that you want them to do, but you still have to get them to do what you want them to do because they want to do it, right? So, and that's our two primary missions is to do that. We're the only force in the military where for our two primary missions, we don't deploy somewhere and try and kill somebody. We deploy somewhere to link up with people and then train, advise, lead, and equip them so that then we can go and help them, achieve their own freedom or things like that. It's a huge different thing. And so in today's business world, that is much closer to the environment that we have than in terms of kind of anything hierarchical that we're used to. So just want to be clear on that. Really, all I've done is I've taken special forces principles and reverse engineered them, as it were, and found some ways where we can apply that to our business world today. So there's a couple of courses that we have as well too. The firefighter to fire starter course, which is kind of the beginning leadership course that we have, and then we have the epic leaders course, which you went through, and that's more involved. That's for the C-suite, and that deals with things at a much greater level. But the difference there is that anything that we do is not it's not generalized. Like we're not going to talk about theory. What we're going to do is we're going to talk about very specific things, and then you're going to take that and you're going to apply it to whatever you're doing in your job right now and help you figure out how to do that. And you're going to learn by doing and applying it. So yeah, there's theory there, but I mean, there's so much more practical stuff than there are in, I want to say, most leadership courses where they're just talking to you about theory. They're talking about why this is a good thing, but then they don't show you how to do it. And we spent a lot of time showing you how to do it and giving you some good tools. So we also have a group on the new platform called School. That's SKOOL. And again, you just go to the Green Beret Way on School, and you're more than welcome to join our community there. And eventually that will be fully fleshed out with courses that you'll be able to take right there on school. And we do a live session every Friday, right now, every Friday, 2 p.m. Eastern time, where people can ask their leadership questions and we're happy to help them out.
Awesome. So we're going to have all of the links in the description of this video down below. So please check them out. I can personally attest, I have been through Rob's epic leadership course. It is the best leadership course that I personally have ever seen. And I've been to a military academy. I've been a senior officer on merchant vessels, all the way up to captain's rank. Been a Navy reservist. I've been a leader, an entrepreneur, and I can tell you that this course does make a difference. It can really change how you look at leadership entirely. So, little plug there. But please check them out in the description. There will be links. So check out those links and see where you can connect with Rob. It's definitely worth it to level up your leadership ability. So with that, Rob, thanks so much for being here. This has been awesome and amazing. And hopefully we can do this again.
Sounds good. Thanks.